Hey, welcome to Journey Through the Scriptures. My name is Philip Thomas, pastor of Journey here in Elgin, Texas. Whenever you may be listening to this, we are now in Genesis chapter 25 through 28. If you want to take a moment and pause and read through those, encourage you to do that. We talked about Isaac, and now Isaac is now married to Rebekah. So now we're looking at Abraham kind of as the founder, if you will, of this faith. Now you have his child who is continuing this covenant along. And so now we have Isaac and Rebekah. Chapter 25 starts off. Abraham has married again. He did have some other children as well, but the covenant is going to focus through Isaac. That is very clear and obvious. And so we have Abraham who dies. He is taken back and buried with Sarah. And now the scene shifts and the focus shifts to Isaac and Rebekah. It is interesting, I just to bring up, is that Ishmael also was there to bury Abraham. Isn't that interesting? Even though the challenges, and we talked about those challenges, Ishmael still obviously had a respect for Abraham. And so we see that Ishmael and his line is still important. But we get there in verse 21 says, Isaac pleads with the Lord for his wife, Rebekah, because she still had not had a child. And the Lord granted this plea, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. And then it's interesting that God actually speaks to Rebekah. A lot of times we think, that God was speaking to the patriarchs, if you will, but he spoke to everyone, right? Because we are all created in the image of God, male and female. God created them. So God was speaking to Rebekah, and he told her, he said, two nations are in your womb, two people shall be separated from your body, one people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. So it's kind of a foretaste of what's to come. We have seen from the beginning that every family has dysfunction, and even in this family that's been called by God, they have dysfunction as well. Doesn't mean that God likes dysfunction. It just means we're going to experience that. So if your family's experiencing dysfunction, guess what? God still works in the midst of your family and can still bring healing no matter what you may be experiencing. So we now have Isaac and Rebekah, and I'm trying to keep all these names in my head straight, but if I ever misspeak, I do apologize. But you have Isaac and Rebekah, and they have twins, Esau and Jacob. Esau is the oldest, but Jacob comes out and he's holding on to the heel of Esau, right? Kind of, again, there's going to be some conflict. You see it from the beginning. And so now you have Esau and Jacob, and now we move quickly from their birth to a scene that's interesting but very important. So Esau is a hunter, kind of goes out. The best way to probably just describe it is he's the manly man, right? And Isaac kind of has a more affinity towards him. Jacob is not quite that outgoing, doesn't like to hunt, things like that. Rebekah is closer to Jacob, and there's obviously tension brewing there. And so one day Esau has been out hunting, and he obviously was not successful that day. And so he comes back and he's starving to death, and Jacob has some food, and Esau is begging him for food. And Jacob sees an opportunity and he says, well, you're going to need to sell me your birthright. Now, there's plenty of fault to go around here. One, Jacob is kind of taking advantage of a situation, but it's not like Esau is about to die. Like he's very hungry, he's starving, which probably all of you have been in that place at some point. I can think of times. I can remember a time at like Six Flags where I was too cheap to buy any food from the place, and by the end of the day, you're starving to death, right? And you feel like I've got to get something to eat, but you're not about to die, right? Well, Esau wasn't about to die, but he needed some food, and it shows how little he cared for the birthright, that he really didn't take that seriously. Well, Jacob did. Jacob wanted the birthright. It was important to him. And so, see, he saw an opportunity to say, all right, here, you can have this right now. Just let me have your birthright. And Esau in his, kind of desire and caught up in the emotion of the moment, just gave up his birthright. Well, neither brother is that too does that look very highly on them, but the fact that Esau just was so flippant with the birthright definitely is a problem. So we have that happen. Then you have chapter 26. I do want to hit something in chapter 26. This again is just kind of the people of God, this group that is now led by Isaac, continues to interact with this other group of people led by Abimelech. And this is probably Abimelech's son, but there's kind of this constant back and forth, and they kind of have problems at times, but overall they're okay with each other. And Isaac kind of does the same thing that Abraham does, and he pretends that Rebekah is his sister. Abimelech recognizes pretty soon that no, that's not your sister, and he says, hey, don't do that to us. We want to respect that, which didn't always happen, but it showed that they had a respect for this group of people. But then we have something that's interesting. And one of the things that's important about as we read through Scripture is Scripture does give us kind of the basics of human nature and some of the ugliness of our human nature, of our sinfulness, and kind of what it leads to. And so what happens here is Isaac and Rebekah and the people are living within this area where Abimelech and his people are. It's their land, but they're living there together. And what happens is Isaac begins to prosper. In verse 12 of chapter 26, it says, then Isaac sowed into that land and reaped in the same year 100-fold. And the Lord blessed him. The man began to prosper and continued prospering until he became very prosperous. Just in case you didn't know, Isaac is prospering. Right? For he had possessions of flocks and possessions of herd and a great number of servants. So the Philistines envied him. Now this is interesting because here Isaac is doing well, that he is doing things right. And instead of the Philistines kind of looking and saying, man, what is he doing? Maybe we can do that to also prosper. What do? They envy him. That's human nature. That is not good. We should fight against that human nature. It becomes really easy just to envy people who are prosperous, right? Rather than looking and saying, well, what could I do to also be prosperous as well? And it says, so now the Philistines had stopped up all the wells which his father's servants had dug. So they filled in all the wells. So not only did they envy him, but they were like, you know what? We're so upset that you're prospering and we're not. We're going to try to make you not prosper as well. We have to be really careful with that. That is not a good human emotion, but it is one that sometimes is we are being encouraged to have, and we need to make sure that we fight that envy. And so it's interesting how Isaac handles this. He actually just keeps moving away. He's like, it's not worth getting into a battle. He continues to move away. He and Abimelech finally again have another agreement that everything's going to be okay. And they move on from there. But that brings us to the end of that chapter 26. It talks about Esau. He actually takes two wives that are not part of the Abraham line. And Isaac and Rebekah were both grieved by that. So again, here's Esau not really grasping the importance of this covenant people that God has started through Abraham. So then we have this scene where Isaac is getting old. He can't see very well, and he knows it's getting close to the end of his life, probably. So it's time for him to give the birthright and the blessing. And so Rebekah hears him tell Esau, he wants Esau to go make a soup, go hunt, make a soup, come back. He's going to give the birthright. Rebekah hears that, tells Jacob, comes up with the plan that, hey, we can deceive Isaac. And so Jacob puts on some kind of goat's clothing, right? And so that he is hairy. Rebekah makes the soup the way that she knows that Isaac likes, and Isaac goes and deceives his father. Kind of again, not a great situation, but this is just what happened. That's why the Bible tells it. This is what happened. Jacob, sometimes I think we look at Jacob as kind of a bad character in all of this. He's also put in a pretty bad position. He's either going to deceive his father or he's going to go against his mother's wishes, right? So he's kind of there, and he also believes that he has the birthright, that Esau has given him the birthright. So he goes through with this, and Isaac actually gives him the birthright. And then we have Esau coming in, and Esau says, "Now I want the birthright because I am your oldest son." He kind of reminds Isaac of that. Remember, I'm your oldest son. There's kind of that, I know I may have given this away at another time, but remember, I'm the oldest, so I should get it. And Isaac says, "No, I've already given the birthright." And Esau asked for a blessing, and the birthright and the blessing kind of all went together. And Isaac gives him a blessing, but it's not a great blessing. And so you see Esau become very angry, as obviously to the point that he wants to kill Jacob as soon as he can. And so Jacob then flees. But now we know that the covenant line, is going to go through Jacob. And so Jacob flees as he's going back to kind of where they found Rebekah, back to Laban, who was Rebekah's brother. He's headed that way, and he has this interesting dream. It's called Jacob's ladder. You may have heard of that phrase, Jacob's ladder. And so Jacob, he's gone through all of this. Isaac has given him the birthright and the blessing, but those are just human words. But it's here at Bethel that as he lays down and he puts his head down on a stone, which some people could say, well, maybe that's why he was having dreams, is he's sleeping on a stone. But he was sleeping, and God appears to him in a dream, and it's a staircase with messengers from God that are going up and down, they're kind of constantly interacting. And here he is in the presence of God, beside God, and God promises him that your descendants will be blessed, reinforces that covenant blessing that had gone from Abraham, gone to Isaac, and now is going to Jacob. So there's that continuity there. And that dream is important to think about. And what it's reminding us of is God's interaction and his involvement with the world around us, that he is involved in this world, that he does care about what's going on. And so Jacob, that point was reinforced to him as now because he's fleeing from his family. He's probably questioning, hey, have I done, or he knows that he hasn't done exactly right. He deceived Isaac. But now God is reinforcing to him that it's going to be okay. And this is really where you see Jacob, his relationship with God really starts to solidify. In verse 16, it says, "Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, 'Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it.'" So before he wasn't really thinking about God. Now he recognizes, no, God is with me. It says, "And he was afraid and said, 'How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven.'" So all of a sudden we see Jacob start to have a real relationship with God. And it's a very pivotal moment, an important moment, because he is going to be responsible for continuing this covenant that God started with Abraham so many years before. So that brings us to the end of chapter 28. Jacob is fleeing, and we're going to read Genesis chapter 29 through 36. So encourage you to read those chapters, and we'll see you next.